Okay, Chapter 12 deals with sample surveys, and you'll need to get out your study guide for Chapter 12 that I gave you guys. That there's a place for you to take some notes as we go through. There's a lot of vocabulary in this chapter, so I'm also going to be providing the reading guide for you and asking that you start reading on Chapter 12. So first, suppose we wanted to find out if high school students in America approve or disapprove of continued military action in Iraq. I have used this question for quite a few years now. I'm probably going to have to be changing it soon because it looks like we've pulled out quite a bit out of Iraq. But anyway, we're going to go through the process of this. One of the terms that you'll need to be familiar with is population, and I know this is the first place you have to write down. I'm going to keep talking, so you might find that you want to pause this and write down the information on your study guide. But a population is the entire group of people, animals, or things about which we want information. So in our example, what is the population? It's who we wanted to find out about. We want to find out about high school students in America. So that is our population. All high school students in America. Okay, a census. A census is when information is gathered from the entire population. Every 10 years, the United States attempts to do a census. They're not 100% successful because there are some people who they can't track down. There's homeless people was the primary problem. But it would be way too costly and time-consuming to use a census in this case to find out about all the high school students in the United States. If we tried to do that, probably by the time we got done, they would no longer be high school students. So instead, we do a sample, and a sample is a part of the population from which we actually collect information used to draw conclusions about the whole. And that's really what drives a lot of statistics. It's too costly to do a census. You can't get information from everyone, so instead you draw a sample. And how you draw your sample will make a difference on how well your sample predicts what the population thinks. Could we interview all students at Delphus Jefferson High School to obtain our sample? So that would be saying, does Delphus Jefferson High School truly represent all the students, all high school students in America? And the answer would be no. Delphus Jefferson is just one. We all live in the same geographic region. There's a lot of ethnicity. Ethnicity is not representative of the entire U.S. when you look at the population in Delphus. And students in large cities might feel differently. So because Delphus Jefferson High School is not representative of all high school students, then you can't use them as a good sample. Could we interview, going on here, what that's called is selection bias or undercoverage. So that's the term that you would use for that situation if you didn't use a representative sample. Suppose we only wanted to know opinions of Delphus Jefferson High School students. So now we're going to narrow it down. We could send out a questionnaire and ask students to put their completed surveys in a box in the office. We've done things like that before at school. What's the problem with this is that is called voluntary response sample. And it's biased because generally only students with strong opinions will respond. And this kind of thing you see a lot of times on ESPN. They'll say, call in with your opinion, and they'll have a phone number there where you call in. Well, only people with really strong opinions will call in, and so you can't really look at the data you gather from that situation and make a valid conclusion about it because the sample was drawn incorrectly. It's not a good sample. So you really want to be aware of beware of a voluntary response sample. What if we interviewed students in the cafeteria before school? Would this give us a good sample? No. Some students might go directly to their class. The interview might only, another thing is the interview might only approach people with whom they feel comfortable. Even if they did this at lunchtime when all the students were in the cafeteria. If you were an interviewer, think about the people that you're going to go up and approach and ask a question to. You're just going to ask the people you feel comfortable with. And because of that, you've introduced some bias. The other thing, too, in our cafeteria before school, you're probably going to end up with freshmen and sophomores and getting their opinion, because they're the ones that ride the bus and come in, because most of the older classmen come in later, so that they don't have to come in quite so early. Okay, this is called convenience sampling, and it's biased. We see convenience sampling outside of the grocery stores when there'll be someone standing there and ask you questions. That's convenience sampling, and it's biased. People do it because it's convenient. So, but your results are not necessarily going to be reflective of the population that you are interested in. Suppose we're able to interview 100 students. How can we ensure that we get a good sample? One of the things we'd want to do is get a list of all the students, and this is called our sampling frame, and we're going to select a sample from the sampling frame. We could number each student from 1 to 300, or 1 to however many there are. We could use a random number generator like we did in Chapter 11, and we could select a sample of 100 students. Now generally, and we are going to talk a little bit later about sample size, usually you don't want your sample size to be larger than 10% of your population, in which case that would give us a sample size of 30 out of 300 students, which then of course we have the problem of our sample size isn't large enough. So you do have some problems because our population is only 300, but I'm just trying to show you the process at this point. Okay, so if we do this process, this is called a simple random sample. And there's two things that take place in a simple random sample. The first is every individual has an equal chance of being selected, and every possible sample of size 100 has an equal chance of being selected. So those two things need to be true in order to be a simple random sample. What if we thought there might be a difference among grade levels? Okay, freshmen, sophomore, juniors, seniors. Perhaps seniors are going to feel differently because, especially the guys, if they have to register for the draft, if the draft was reinstituted. So there are those types of things that, that could make a difference between grade levels. So we could divide the population into groups of similar individuals called strata. In our case, we have 4 strata: freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors. So we could separate those into those 4 groups. We could choose a separate simple random sample from each stratum. Stratum is the singular, strata is plural. It doesn't have to be the same number from each group. Then the question, is this a simple random sample? Why or why not? Now, it's a simple random sample perhaps from each stratum, but overall, it's not. Even because in order to be a simple random sample, each individual has to have the same chance to be chosen, which they do, but each sample does not. For example, you can't get a sample with only juniors and seniors. That's not possible. So out of the 300 students, we do not have a simple random sample in this case. We have what's called a stratified sample, and we've done a simple random sample within each strata. Once we have chosen our sample, how will we gather our data? Should we send questionnaires to the 100 students in our sample? A major problem interviewers encounter is non-response. This creates a bias, as we said earlier, because people with strong opinions are more likely to respond. So we'd have to have some kind of follow-up. The questions on the survey can affect the response. Consider the following questions. If Iraq continues to this was actually the questions that I used. This was, I devised this, or I came up with this, this PowerPoint presentation right after in 2001, right after 9/11. So this was before it actually had taken place. But here are my 2 questions. If Iraq continues to amass weapons for chemical and biological warfare and refuses to comply with the United Nations demands, do you support military action to protect the future of humanity? And here's another possible question. America's tradition has always been that we don't strike unless struck first. Do you support a military attack on Iraq, or do you think we should wait until America's immediate security is at risk? Okay, you can see that these questions are very biased, and they're going to affect how a person responds to them. So you have to be really careful with your questions when you do a survey. Poor wording of questions brings about measurement or response bias. You might have selected your sample to represent the population quite well, but if your measuring tool brings about a biased response, your data is worthless. Multi-stage sampling, one way to get a sample of all high school students in America. The first stage would be to take a sample from the 3,000 counties in the United States. Then stage 2, select a sample of high schools within each county. Stage 3, select a sample of students within each high school. And the sample at any stage could be a simple random sample or a stratified sample. But that's called a multi-stage sample because you're just kind of narrowing it down. But when you start out with all the counties, but then you narrow it down to some schools. And then if you have a large enough sample, then you're going to end up with some rural schools and some urban schools. So you have a variety of schools. Or you can even stratify it, and you could say, I'm going to choose so many urban schools and so many rural schools and that kind of thing. In our example, the population and the sampling frame were the same, the list of students at Delphus Jefferson High School. Suppose we wanted the opinion of all Delphus residents and we used the phone book as the sampling frame. Why is this sampling frame not the same as the population? Okay, the reason would be that you have unlisted phone numbers. So to use or people that don't have a phone. So using the phone book can sometimes cause a problem. So that would be selection bias or undercoverage. Okay, that kind of gives you an overview of Chapter 12. This does not take the place of reading the chapter, so make sure that you start in on reading Chapter 12.